Hello again, welcome to the vlog. This week we're going to talk about characters. Happy Field Friday. I thought I'd talk a little bit about behind the scenes of how to come up with a character and how I would approach it if I were coming up with characters and why I would do something like this. So I'm here in my home office surrounded by characters that I like from some of my favorite games. But I thought I'd talk a little bit about this so that if you're planning to do your own game or your own stories or your own worlds, this is what I would start with. So yeah, Club Penguin, we thought about things like from every angle. I'm not the absolute expert in this by any stretch of the imagination, so I'm just going to teach you what I know. Other folks on the team are a lot stronger in characters than I am, so I'm not going to pretend to be the ultimate expert in all things characters. I think Emma, Cody, Deanna, Stephanie, they're probably maybe a little bit better in this. I don't know. I'll teach you what I know about characters and how I approach them. So I learned a lot about characters, not specifically from this game, but I don't have a copy of it. So you've probably heard of this board game, Dungeons and Dragons. So this is the Dungeon Master's Guide. And the Dungeon Master in D&D is the person who is orchestrating the whole quest. They're the person who's saying, I control the monsters and all the NPCs, and every player around the table is going to interact with the story that I'm telling as the Dungeon Master. But critical to the success of everything is the character sheet. So this is already a filled one. So this comes in the default Dungeons and Dragons guide. So the Dungeons and Dragons basically just gives you mechanisms and dice to express characteristics about a character. So you'll see in here you've got, strength, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma, and obviously that's going to tell you a little bit about a character's demeanor. Are they really charismatic? So if we were doing a character sheet, we could do this about anybody. We would make up a character and you say, oh, Chris. This is the character sheet about Chris. Chris is a human, and he's a fighter. And, what that means is, he's strong and dexterous, but he's also not the most charming. So it gives you an idea about the where the character comes from. And so I used to, when I was a kid, I would play with some friends. I'd play Star Wars, the role-playing game, which is Star Wars but in a tabletop environment. So you have something similar to the Dungeon Master's Guide. We also played a lot of Hero Quest. I'd say I probably played more Hero Quest than I ever did Dungeons and Dragons. And what's great about those games is they're tabletop experiences, but they help you tell stories. In fact, fun fact, you may not have known this, but this is such a great tool for inventing stories that the Adventure Time team would, apparently in the writing room, this is how they would come up with their scripts. They would sit down and they would come up with their own character sheets for all the different characters that are in Adventure Time, and then they would play out scenarios. But the difference is the Dungeon Master, in their case, would come up with really wacky, out-of-this-world scenarios to play through. So when we were doing stuff at Penguin, we also had character sheets, and I managed to find these. So this is there's Jetpack Guy, there's Rookie. It gives you an idea just a little bit about these characters' personalities. And this was a template that we generated. It took us a little while to come up with this, but it gives you a lot biography, what they're like, what their role is, some quotes that you would hear from them. But more importantly, defining moment of awesome, which sounds very Deanna and Cody. I'm sure they came up with this one. Favorite things, their appearance, but random facts, quirks about the personality, which is where it starts to get interesting. So if you watch a movie, a character is defined by their experiences and how they react to those experiences, right? So you have a defining moment in Batman is when he's quite young. Spoiler alert: his parents, he watches them get murdered, and so it makes and he falls down the well, so he's afraid of bats. So he has this whole leaning into his fear, and then he has this anger about his parents being murdered, and so he has a bit of a violent streak against bad guys. So there's a lot of the things that happen to him where he has some sort of nurture in nature. So he has some things that are natural to his personality, maybe a short fuse, but then you have other things that are more learned. So, nature and everything around him has sort of had these experiences that have impacted that character to influence them in a certain way. So when we were thinking about characters, or at least when I would think about characters at Penguin, we would think about them as like, where have they been? Like Rockhopper's a great example. Most of the time he's not on the island. So why not? Why is he on adventures? Where is he going? What is he exploring? What is he doing? And the fun of a role-playing game, like, you look at like something like Dungeons and Dragons or Star Wars the role-playing game, or there's many other tabletop RPGs that allow you to explore stories. They give you a chance to imagine what would happen with a character if they're gone. And the thing is, it gets, when you're trying to make the player the hero, that's the challenging part as a dungeon master. So when you're playing D&D, you have a team of heroes around the table, and you can bend the story depending on how the players interact with you and how the rolls go. So if I don't have any dice handy, but if you roll die and it goes well or poorly, that influences the direction of the story, because you may have as a dungeon master, you may have set it up so that you think that the characters are going to go this way. But then when it's not successful or they do something unexpected, you suddenly have to be able to completely change your whole plans. So as a dungeon master, I think it's probably one of the best learnings that you could do to teach yourself how to bend a story and adapt depending on how players interact. And that was sort of the challenge with telling a story in Penguin, because we had millions of heroes. So suddenly it's like, okay, well now with millions of heroes, how do you let each player be their own hero? So if a player is playing as Jetpack Guy, and Jetpack Guy's primary trait is that he's tough, but his shadow trait, or his dark side, is that he's actually kind of facetious and sarcastic. And his fatal flaw is that he's inflexible and rigid. That sort of plays out the characters, or the people at the table, the dungeon master interacting with Jetpack Guy, and vice versa, have to adapt to each other in the scenarios. That's why, to me, I would like to see more, Penguin lore RPG stuff, to see where people come up with where the world would go. I mean, if you think about it, we didn't go too far, didn't explore too much with Penguin as an island. There's like two islands. There's the lore of CPI, and there's the lore of CP. And I think they're sort of related, but unrelated in a way. But those are just two places. There's all these other places that you could have explored, and all these adventures you could have gone on. And what was happening in between the months of when there was a Frozen party and other things were happening in the in-game narrative. If you're coming up with your own characters, my suggestion is to find a system like GURPS, which is an open source role-playing game system, or even just Dungeons and Dragons or something similar. If you're not into Dungeons and Dragons, like I said, there's Star Wars, there's other ones that are less fantasy themed and might be more up your alley, like space fantasy, which Star Wars is. Or if you're true sci-fi, there's lots of sci-fi RPGs, but they help you to get accustomed to the idea of characters. And so it's funny, I went for coffee with a guy, Reese, that we worked with. Great guy, Reese. And Reese, for a while, they had a team that was the online actors, and so they would actually walk around as the characters in the suits. So I don't want to spoil too much, but I said, hey, do you want to be on the vlog sometime? So he's actually the first person I talked to about being on the vlog, because there's a lot of people whose stories working on the Penguin team weren't really ever shared. And for me, I'm doing this to capture my memories while I still have them for you guys, and to teach you how to come up with your own worlds and stories, because I want to see what the Penguin fans and you guys come up with together. So it doesn't even matter that there's the thing that you're nostalgic about. It's like, cool, yeah, there's these characters, but who are your characters? Who are the heroes you've come up with? Who are the antagonists that you've come up with? So that's one thing that's interesting about Penguin, was that we it's hard to have a really tense story when there's very few things that you can have tension about in a kid-safe world. So it was quite fun to try and work around the challenge of, if how you can't, it has to be safe, but there needs to be tension of the safe world, but there's something that feels sort of unsafe, but it's okay, it's still safe, but you can pretend within it. That's why I think the PSA missions worked really well, because those were sort of James Bond's spy style, but like very old school James Bond. That's sort of classic spy story. And later missions were more like the Mission Impossible style story. Like EPF was more Mission Impossible, like gadgets and high tech and really interesting quests to go on and solve puzzles. That's why it was interesting with System Defender. You have the system that's getting attacked by viruses, but it was funny each time that we'd give you guys something that was not penguins. You'd be like, yeah, that's cool with robots, but I want penguins. So like bits and bolts and System Defender, not quite as, I guess, appealing to a lot of folks. It wasn't as broad appeal as penguins, because that was just the world. So the 4 things to think about are this character diamond. And this is one thing that I learned. Like Lance and I were at a game developer conference years ago. That was back when he was still at Penguin and I was as well. And we went to a talk at GDC in Vancouver. So I think it was GDC Online. And there was a talk on narrative design there with a guy who did, I think the book's called Creating Emotions in Games. It's a fantastic book. It's really thick. There's a lot of content there. But one of the ideas that he put out there that I hadn't really heard as a model before, but it totally makes sense, is this idea of a character diamond. And a character diamond is basically like, if you look at this, is like, here's a character, and here are 4 traits. I don't know if you can read that. Because you have 4 traits. You have the primary trait, the supporting trait, the shadow trait, and the fatal flaw of a character. And that's a really great way, with just a few words, to give you actually a really good idea about what a character is like. So in this case, with Rookie is, his primary trait is he's quite earnest. Like he's just a very earnest, down-to-earth, just sort of guy. His supporting trait is that he's quite clumsy, as you'd know, if you ever interacted with him when it was the character, like the mascot in the suit in Disneyland. The shadow trait is that he always wants approval, which is sort of interesting. There's a Transformers character that's sort of like this that I quite enjoy. Is I like the tension of Generation 1 Transformers of Starscream and Megatron. If you've ever watched it, it's hilarious, because Megatron is always basically trying to like take over the Decepticons, and he's always trying to subvert whatever Megatron has come up with next, and he's trying to like trick him constantly. And yet Megatron is just sort of like, ha ha ha, and he lets him get away with just the dumbest things in the world. So but he's like sort of approval seeking in his rebellion. It's a really interesting character, Starscream. He's obnoxious and he's funny, so he's like comedic effect, but he also has this sort of intriguing like need to be accepted. He wants people around him to accept him. He wants approval. So I just think that's an interesting trait. The last one is the fatal flaw. So in Rookie's case, fatal flaw is quite naive. He can be tricked. He's gullible, right? So anyways, that's a little bit about characters. I hope that was interesting for you. And then just a reminder that today we launched this contest. So the contest is going to be going for about 20-ish days. So the details will be in the link. I'll put the link in the description below. But you'll get a chance to win one. There's 2 chances to win. So you could win the Puffle or you could win the Penguin. And hopefully if this goes well, we'll do another one in the future. But I just wanted to give a shout out to Lance. Thank you, Lance, for the donation of the prize. Because obviously it just is way cooler than your standard plush thing. We thought it'd be fun to give something away. And I've always wanted to do a giveaway like this, so it's great. And I'm super excited also to be doing it on Player. There's a bunch of former Penguins actually on the Club Penguin team, folks on the Player team. And so they've made a great platform, and I'm stoked to be able to use it for this. So anyways, guys, I hope this was insightful. If there's anything else you'd like to know about characters or whatnot, let me know in the comments. You can throw something down. Let me know which characters you'd want to hear about, and maybe I'll get someone with a little bit more insight, or just who has a story you haven't heard from yet. Bring them on, have a conversation with them, and maybe we can talk a little bit more. Anyways, thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and waddle on.